You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your 5-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
Welcome back, guests, and good to see you, Mike and Geoff.
Good morning.
Good to see you, Kate. Are we still a separate country today?
We're still separate. Yes.
Yeah.
Canada is still a sovereign nation. Yes, we'll come back to that. It feels salient. Later in the strategy suite, we have a lot to work with this week, and we're going to talk about the latest in the tariff war, the shift in how progressives are talking about Energy East and Trans Mountain, 2 clippings related to Premier Eby's address at the opening of the Invictus Games, and the Children's Commissioner's report, and more. Like whatever else the three of us wander off and talk about, and I can't rein us in, that'll also be covered. But first, our guest today is Karin Kirkpatrick, elected as the BC Liberal MLA for West Vancouver Capilano in 2020. She planned to retire from provincial politics after 1 term, but galloped back to the political arena after the plug was pulled on BC United on the eve of the BC election. Objecting to Kevin Falcon's decision to withdraw BC United candidates from the ballot, she ran as an independent candidate, earning 21% of the vote. Since the election, she has been advocating for BC United to return as a centrist alternative to the BC Conservatives and the BC NDP. And just this past week, she publicly called for Kevin Falcon's resignation as leader of BC United. I'm just checking my notes here. Yes, confirmed, Kevin Falcon is still the leader of that party. Outside of politics, Karin is a chartered professional accountant, holds a Master of Laws degree, a Master of Business Administration. She was CEO of the Real Estate Foundation of BC, Assistant Dean of UBC's Sauder School of Business, CEO of Family Services of Greater Vancouver, and CEO of the Private Career Training Institutions Agency of BC.
Need a scroll for all that.
Oh my gosh.
Did my mom write that?
It's such a pleasure to have you here, Karin. Thanks for joining us at Hotel Pacifico.
Thanks for inviting me.
So can we go back in time? Can we go back in time? Because I do want to just mark the fact that I think a year ago, the world looked very different for you. And I don't think you were contemplating running as an independent in the fall back then. Can you tell us a little bit about, take us back to a year ago and what you were thinking about your political future?
Yeah, I had come to the conclusion that there were some good people in place and I could leave. I had some health issues the previous few years and through the pandemic, and I was a bit tired and so thought I would leave, but I would support the party and I would support my caucus as best I could. Have a high respect, high regard for the people that I sat in that room with, my caucus members. But when the rise of the BC Conservatives, hearing and seeing some of the things that they were doing, and then Kevin Falcon, without consultation with anyone other than I think 4 or 5 people in a back room, withdrew the party from the election, I just felt this is not democratic. There was too much influence in order to actually impact an election. I just felt it was wrong. And I got escalated about it. And I thought, well, I can't do nothing about this. And I had a lot of people ask if I would step up and run as an independent. Actually, I heard it on in one of the media that I was running as an independent. And so that got me thinking, well, maybe I will. So I had a lot of good people around me, a lot of good people across British Columbia. And then, of course, 4 of my previous MLA colleagues came in as independents as well. And that was that was my goal, is to really give people an alternative to an ideological left and ideological right, and really provide a center option. And realistically, knowing that winning was very unlikely, but really made the point, and it was a great experience.
Can you give us any insight into what triggered Kevin Falcon to take those steps? Because that's where your current battle lies. Like, have you been able since that night to figure out what changed his mind from, a fundraiser on a weekend and then 48 hours later taking the steps you're talking about?
Yeah, it was 24 hours.
24, sorry.
After that event, which was quite shocking. There'd been a lot of pressure on Kevin, as we know, and there'd been a lot of missteps along the way with the branding, and the name wasn't resonating. He wasn't resonating, and he was becoming more and more aware of that. But we still had a great team behind us, and 40,000 members, and opportunities. My understanding, and there's lots of rumor and conjecture around, and what actually happened, I don't know. But I understand there was, a meeting one evening in Browns on Lonsdale in North Vancouver between his sister-in-law and a party member of the BCC, and they penned a deal the next day. There was pressure, I believe, put on him by the business community, but still it was sideswiped everybody else in the party. And so we're scratching our heads. We understand that there was a lot of pressure on him, but when you're a leader, you lead and you take it all the way to the end.
What was the feeling inside caucus going back about a year ago? Because clearly the poll results were working against you. The Conservatives were on the rise. You obviously watched some of your former colleagues leave caucus, not just John Rustad and Bruce Banham, but also Lauren Dirksen,
Yeah.
Sturko, and then later Teresa Watt. Like, how was that to deal with? And, what's your analysis of how you got to that place?
It was really tough. It was tough in the caucus room. We really tried to believe and support Kevin. I think caucus was very good about trying to inspire and keeping his energy up and going. But we knew it was going to be a challenge. I mean, I think if you look 2 years ago, we really looked like a government in waiting. And then it went bad, and it went bad really fast. And a number of circumstances was John Rustad leaving the party, us changing our name and doing what I think was an abysmal job in that whole process. People not being able to understand who we are, connect with vision values. We started moving, and I felt kind of chasing the right, so we were getting away from that center place. And it just got messy. But in the room with my colleagues, who are all great, dear people, it was tough for them to go out and talk about Kevin and try and raise money as a BC United member.
So at the time, certainly there were some prevailing winds relative to the conservative brand that you just had to contend with. Like, you could do everything else right, and it was still going to be a major force. I'm wondering, like, in light of that, is there any part of you who maybe could see a case for what Kevin Falcon did and I think he articulated the move to remove BC United as sort of a way to, what's the word, to sort of mitigate and bring sort of the BC Conservatives more to the center. Is there a case for that maybe you could see?
Well, I can't imagine bringing them more to the center when you take a look at the kind of rhetoric that is tolerated in that party. I mean, there's a lot of people who are very, very strong right social conservatives, and so I think it's easy for him to say that's what the plan was, but the reality of that was not going to happen. His position and those in the business community initially were that he fell on the sword, he did the right thing, he anything to get rid of the NDP. But there were 40,000 members of that party who did not put their support behind the BC Conservatives. And many were leaving. They were strong federal conservatives or right federal conservatives. But there were a lot of federal liberals. There were a lot of moderate voters that were members of that party who didn't have a say in what happened. There was no vote. There was nothing. And so I don't believe that was the right thing for British Columbians to take that centered choice away. I think he may have believed at the time the right thing for Kevin Falcon. But I think it was a wrong decision. And when they sat in that back room and made that deal, did they think about all of these people who are owed hundreds of thousands of dollars right now that were volunteers on campaigns, and all the people that lost their jobs, and all the contractors that haven't been paid? I'm sure he's not out of pocket, but there's a lot of good people, members and volunteers that have been really hurt by this.
Well, that's what's so striking to me is that in some respects, he made a very shrewd move, because by retaining the leadership, he was able to frustrate under the Constitution any effort to run and take the lumps, if that's what was necessary, and then see how you could regroup. And now you've rung the bell many months later saying, okay, enough is enough. You should quit now. And you've just had crickets in response to that, I guess.
I called for Kevin to resign on August 28th on our caucus call, and he said no and then abruptly left the call. The reason that he has stayed, that I can just surmise, is that if anybody else went in there on that day or now, that there would be the ability to rebuild the party, to bring excitement back, to get the bills paid, and to
Right.
really bring back a center party. But it can't be done as long as he's the leader. And so the only because I mean there's no joy in for him, I'm sure, in being the leader right now, and he's not out there and nobody knows how to get in touch with him and he doesn't return media calls, and so he's really a non-entity, but he's holding that space to block anyone else from coming in and trying to rebuild. And right now is exactly when we need a center party. And you may be asking me about that or talking about that. Is that real shift right now? Is that it is time for a center party, and people are realizing that Poilievre won our provincial election, Trudeau lost our provincial election, and it's time now where we really need the party that I think we can create.
Yes, we've been talking about the serious problem of copper theft for a few weeks now. So let's get practical and start talking about solutions. Because we can talk about deterrence, and there are some options here, but many of you policy wonks will instinctively look upstream for the best ways to address any issue. That is what the UK did just over a decade ago, when copper theft was costing the British economy an estimated £1 billion a year. In 2012, the British Transport Police launched Operation Tornado to tackle the problem of metal theft, trace sellers of scrap metal, and make it harder to pass on illegitimately obtained copper and other metals. Within a year, copper theft was on the decline, dropping 51%. Other steps the UK has taken include tighter controls around the sale of scrap metal and halting cash-in-hand payments for copper cable. New Brunswick and Alberta have banned cash payments, but BC has not. Like we talked about last week, guests, the stakes are high. Reliable connectivity is important to public safety and to our economy. So it's time to get serious here in BC about protecting public infrastructure and safeguarding essential services by taking real steps to stop copper theft.
I could probably make a case on a couple things for Kevin. One is that his stated goal was to stop the NDP, and even on August 28th, I don't think people realized the Conservatives had the ability to beat the NDP, but they almost did. And were it not for 2 or 3 seats, he might have felt vindicated by that. And I think the withdrawal of BC United did help the BC Conservatives in clearing the path and avoiding some vote splits in some key ridings. So I can see that part of it, right? And you've raised an important part too, just the ethics of it and leaving people stranded. And our listeners, not all our listeners may understand that you can't just write a check for $1 million and pay off the debt. You have to raise it $1,400 at a time, which is really hard. So I totally get that part of it as well too. But do you think the world is? I'm just picking up on your comment a minute ago. Do you think the world has changed now? Because that paradigm in August was binary, stop the NDP, only one party can do it, and now we're post tariffs, post-election. Is it a new world now?
It's a new world federally. It's a new world provincially. You can thank Donald Trump for a lot of that, of course, and you can also thank federally if you look at the idea of a Mark Carney perhaps coming in, who is much more of a centrist and an economist. People are perhaps thinking that there is an alternative than a shift to a Poilievre kind of government and that kind of rhetoric. I think it has shifted, and I think it is again the right time to rebuild a center party. And I understand, Mike, what you're saying too is that it was the only way. Believe the only way to defeat the NDP, and it was close, and it almost happened. There were a lot of very strange decisions made, and I'll use James Mitchell for example. He would have taken North Van Lonsdale, North Van Seymour, hands down. Would have won against Susie Chant. For some reason, the Conservatives decided he wasn't the person that they were going to run there. So we've heard from the independents are the ones that caused the Conservatives to lose. That's not the case. But there are a lot of people in the
They blew it
center.
in a number of ridings for sure.
Yeah, they did that all to themselves. But there were a lot of people that weren't conservatives. So when you say it's anything but the NDP, a lot of BC Liberals, previous BC Liberals, and we're still members, voted for the NDP. They didn't vote for the Conservatives. So I think it was there wasn't as much thought given to everybody in that party that wasn't on the right, and those are the folks that helped keep BCC out of government.
We've had this conversation a few times though, Karin, and I feel like that, especially this election result that we had in BC in October, it's one of those like Rorschach blot tests where you can kind of see what you want it. And I'm curious because I think certainly there are conservatives who would say the success they had in nearly taking over the government, nearly taking over the province, was that they were on message and that they were resonating with voters. And so I'm curious from your standpoint, if we take how to interpret that result, what evidence do you have that it wasn't that the conservative that conservative message maybe was something that held them back rather than the thing that propelled them forward?
What I've heard from people I've spoken to is that it was an election about voting against something instead of voting for something. And so again, it was the positioning and the messaging from the BC Conservatives were anything but the NDP. And it didn't matter, kind of what that you've got the Brent Chapmans and people that are just saying and doing horrible things. Don't worry about that, because at least it's not the NDP. And I felt that was a message that out of fear, perhaps, out of people not understanding or knowing, perhaps, but in terms of policy, and they chose a lot of these really divisive kind of SOGI and these things, which the majority of British Columbians, I don't think they wake up in the middle of the night worried about SOGI. I think they wake up worried about how they're going to afford their groceries and pay their rent. And so it was a bit distracting in terms of what are the true issues for British Columbians. But I think it was a vote against something as opposed to a vote for something.
Well, Mike raised a really difficult practical problem. So if Kevin Falcon was to resign tomorrow, what's the status or condition of BC United right now? And do you have any insight into, is there money coming in? Is there capacity to retire some of that debt? What's your thinking on that front?
Well, it's difficult to know. I mean, I'm not on the board, and I want to be clear too. I mean, I'm a due-paying member of BC Liberals, BC United, but I am working with a working group of people right now. Again, not on the board, made up of federal Conservatives and federal Liberals and other, federally unaffiliated people who want to bring back BC United, the BC Liberal Party, and rebuild that with a real vision and values around kind of moderate center government. In terms of actually being able to do that, if we want to use that BC Liberal name again, the owner of that BC Liberal name is the entity, which is BC United. The group and other people in BC who I've been speaking to think, let's start by trying to get in there, help pay off debt, because I just believe we've got a responsibility to a lot of British Columbians who are owed money by that party right now to rebuild, to get excited about it. I do think, again, going back to what we said earlier, we're coming back to people looking for moderates now. And so we can actually get into a point where we're excited. If there was a leadership race, people have expressed interest in actually running, because there is something exciting about getting to rebuild. Fundraising without Kevin there and with some excitement around that. I do. Maybe I'm Pollyanna, I'm naive, but I do think that we can do it as long as we're values-based and excited and really clear on our message. There's an appetite for that in BC, and I'm confident that we can move it forward. But there needs to be a desire and belief on the board that we can do it. And there needs to be an interim leader or a leadership race so that we can replace somebody who is an impediment to our being able to rebuild.
Well, in the NDP, there's a constitutional requirement to have a convention periodically, and leadership reviews are built into that process, not every time, but during at specific times. Is there anything in the Constitution that would force the current group there to come out from under the rock and have an open process?
Well, the Constitution, I think, is very similar to what the NDP have, and there are those same requirements for the AGM and for. Now, my understanding is that there should, under the Constitution, there needs to be an AGM. I think in the next 6 months, there has been no communication or almost no communication between the board and membership. And the board and the candidates that ran previously and the ones who are owed money. So it's a bit of a black hole there right now in terms of understanding what's happening, but they absolutely have to have an AGM. And at the AGM, there is an ability to have a leadership review. But I look at that constitution and I say, part of that constitution to be a member of the party is that you have to be working in the best interest of the party. And when we've got a leader who pulls the party out and fully
Fair
supports,
point.
and there's even something online where he's talking about how great the BC Conservatives are, for that reason alone, the board could remove him as a member, and clearly you can't be the leader if you're not a member of the party.
Well, you've certainly got my cat's attention.
I like your cat, yeah.
Sweet, Mr. Snickers.
But the question is how much attention you can get from those people that were former or current BC Liberals, and leaving Kevin Falcon aside, because at some point he will have to leave. But it seems like there's an existential question that members will have to probably vote on, which is, we want to continue. Because I assume there may be a push from people within the party that say we should not, that we should just, not get in the way of the Conservatives because they are the quote unquote free enterprise alternative. Do you sense resistance to what you're trying to do already?
Well, there's resistance from conservatives in what I'm trying to do, but it is
Within the party,
amazing.
like conservatives that are
Well, but see, it's a real weird place now because we don't know who the conservatives are in our party because they still might be a member, but they were off working on a conservative campaign, and so there's a lot of confusion, and even the riding associations. People don't even know the party still exists. I mean, that's the other issue with having not communicated to the public that you were still here and there is still a party. So it's difficult, but I think, Mike, to answer the question is, again, the party was not a majority of conservatives. The party was, as Kevin and previous leaders have always said, a big tent party, and you've got people from different backgrounds in there. There was a section of it, maybe it was 40%, I don't know, that were strong conservatives, but not all of them recognize themselves in the BC Conservatives, because I'm working with some federal conservatives now that want to bring that center party back, or that center right party back. So I do think there's an appetite for it. I think there's more and more every day that we turn the TV on and we hear about what's happening in the rest of the world. I believe absolutely. And there are people that would be excited about jumping in and leading that party, not me. I would just like to clarify that. That's not why I'm doing this.
You think there are people that would be interested in leading the party?
Yeah, if we can get it through this place where, I mean, if you look on the website right now, there's a phone number on there that when you call it, it says this number is out of service. And you look at the website and the address is now a PO box. So does the party even still have a heartbeat? I think it does. But if we don't do something about that pretty quickly, then we're writing its obituary. It's not going to be there in another few months. We've got to move quickly.
There are interesting parallels in terms of where the BC Conservatives came from, because they had no infrastructure or anything, and except they didn't have $1 million debt. So a new leader comes in. Well, I'm just assuming Kevin Falcon and that group turn the keys over to you, and you've got control of the party. You have to go raise $1 million. You got no money coming in from taxpayer funding that the other parties. Yeah. And then you've got to prepare for an election, finding a full slate of candidates or not. Like it is obviously a tall order, which I could have said that to the BC Conservatives 2 years ago, right? Except you don't necessarily have the air support that they had through Poilievre. So yeah, I'm not saying that. I'm not trying to be Debbie Downer here, because I've been through the BC Liberals in the 1980s when there were 0 seats too. But like, it is daunting though, right? Like it's a hell of a challenge.
It's completely daunting. Every day I wonder, why am I doing this? But there's good people. This isn't just me. There are good people around me that really want to see this happen. And you know what? If you lose every shot you don't take, whatever. It is, we really do feel that we need to at least try. And if it doesn't work, well, we gave it our best. We were trying to provide an option for British Columbians, where I truly believe the majority of British Columbians are moderate voters. And if it doesn't work, maybe it does mean another party. I mean, there's parties, it's like the resistance. There's parties starting in people's basements all over BC right now that are trying to then come and fill that void that we see in politics here. So one way or another, there's going to be a middle moderate party. Whether there's competing candidates in the next election, or it's 4 years, or it's 8 years, I don't know. And back to what we were talking initially about, if Kevin hadn't pulled out, we could be, or the Conservatives and the BC United could be government now, working together. And I think that there would have been more seats won. I mean, who knows? I don't have a crystal ball, but there could have been more seats that way, and they could actually be forming a coalition government right now. So there were a lot of things, a lot of missteps in terms of how it was managed, the timing, and ultimately pulling everybody out.
No, I think the math supports you there. That certainly there are some writings you can look at and say probably a different result if there wasn't a vote split. Not so much like, anyway, we'll come back to this, but I want to ask, because if there's someone who's listening who is cares about there being a more moderate option in BC, who's looking about where putting their efforts, I'm thinking there's a big draw right now in that the Conservatives are a new party. They're shaping their id. They are the opposition by only a small number of seats. There's a real opportunity there, I think, to shape what that is. And so what's the case you would make to them about why they should be spending their energy resuscitating BC United rather than getting in there with the BC Conservatives and helping to shape this new party?
Because I cannot see a federal Liberal ever aligning themselves with the BC Conservatives. And so it's easy for, like, we're not all center right. I'm an accountant, but I'm also somebody who's done a lot of work in affordable housing and social services and support services, and I really believe in that social kind of the social liberal side, but the fiscal conservative side. People are not going to get behind the Conservatives as that option, because we have looked at the kind of candidates that they have allowed to have run and cannot see any way where that is going to be a party that holds the same kinds of values and principles that the majority of British Columbians do. But I mean, the proof's in the pudding, right? Like next week, let's see how they perform. Maybe I'll be surprised. Maybe we'll all be surprised in 2 weeks, and we'll say, I guess there is no need to provide an option for this. But my gut is telling me that 3-4 weeks from now, people will be really looking at supporting us. So anything can happen. But I really believe, truly, that we have to have a center voice, a moderate voice, that we can support the majority of British Columbians. And we do it based on what are the really important things that are happening, not on these kind of divisive issues that really aren't the mainstream challenges for British Columbians.
Could you give us a sense? Go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say, do you think this project is worth it if it's 10 to 15% of the popular vote in one seat next election? Because is that an outcome that you would say, you know what, that's progress?
No, I would be very disappointed with that.
Because your aspiration's much higher.
Oh, my aspiration's much higher. If I didn't have high aspirations, I would not think that we could pay off $1 million in debt. And I think that we can. I'm not going to do it in a month. But no, I absolutely believe that we can get an excited group. Here, I'm going to throw this out there, and the Conservatives and my colleagues will cringe on this one. But do you know it only takes 2 MLAs to form a official party in the legislature?
I heard that somewhere.
3 of them. 3 of them.
Way to go, Geoff.
3 of them, and you're going to be the third party, right? So let's see how the Conservatives treat my fellow colleagues. And let's see if there is an ability to create an option and something they can believe in again. And I'm not saying that, it's naive to think anybody's going to come back, but anything is possible. And if you can say, okay, I just need two of you, one's going to be the leader and one's going to be the house leader, and you don't have to listen to what these other guys are saying and doing, then, and you can still work with them as a coalition. Anything is possible.
A reverse Rustad.
I was going to say.
You got it. You got it. Yeah. Yeah.
Political karma at play.
I like that. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit then. I do want to touch on, because you did run as an independent in this election. And I think, I was looking at the results for the five of you, right? There was in the 20s generally. I think Tom Shapika maybe got 30, but generally in the 20s, like all of you were sort of no one won their seat, but a strong kind of showing. And I'm curious what that experience was like for you and what sort of what insight you gained from running as an independent.
I had a great time. I would do that again. I hope I never have to, but it was a wonderful experience. And I must say the media was very kind to me because I did have a good relationship with the political media. And so I did get a lot of airtime, and I was happy that I was able to talk about that and get my message across. My four colleagues, Coralie Oakes, Bernier Dan Davies, and Tom Shapik, we called ourselves the Fabulous Five. And we would just talk to each other, just kind of to see how are you doing and what's happening. And we had so much support, and we have support provincially. I was able to raise $60,000 in 5 days when I announced that I was going to be running. That wasn't just in my riding, it was across British Columbia. I could not raise $5,000 when Kevin Falcon, I'd go to an event. And so it spoke to people across the province. They may not have been able to vote for me. And of course, running without a party in my own riding, it was very difficult. The media thought I was going to do better. Our polling thought I was going to do better. But I think at the end of the day, people wanted to get rid of Trudeau. So they were supporting the Conservatives. So, but it's interesting because I feel very attached in my community. I know a lot of people. I met people I'd never met before that came out in my community and volunteered. I had 150 volunteers. And again, I had people from all over British Columbia donating. And so I had a great experience. We made our point, and people thanked all of us. They thanked us. And a lot more independents came out and gave their voice in democracy that wouldn't have, because they saw what we were doing.
Well, Karin, I want to thank you so much for coming to talk to us today. I think it's really interesting to sort of walk through the past year of your life, your experiences, and your perspectives for what's ahead. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Really appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, hotel guests. When I was a kid, I grew up in Maple Ridge, right on the border of Pitt Meadows, and we were surrounded by farmland. In fact, we had a small family barn, and I can still remember the chickens clucking. I could hear the coyotes in the distance, and I spent more than a few hours shoveling out stalls, although my sisters might argue that point. But have you ever thought about what goes into a farm, the hardworking farmers, the food it provides, the animals that live there? Or did you even consider that farms are helping to provide energy and address climate change? Over the past few weeks, we've been highlighting the solutions that exist in the energy transition. We've spoken about electricity, natural gas, the role of hybrid energy systems, but what about other low-carbon energy options like renewable natural gas? Renewable natural gas is a low-carbon energy that can help the province advance its climate action goals while providing an option for customers to help reduce overall greenhouse gas emissions. Derived from organic sources, renewable natural gas is a low-carbon direct substitute for conventional natural gas. FortisBC works with farms, landfills, wastewater treatment facilities, as well as local and Indigenous communities across the province and elsewhere to capture and purify this methane, which would otherwise escape into the atmosphere. Significant progress has been made in increasing the supply of low-carbon energy, which allows FortisBC to provide customers with the energy they need while using existing infrastructure and supporting overall emissions reductions. If you are a gas customer interested in renewable gas, visit fortisbc.com/RNG. FortisBC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast.
Hello. You've reached the Hotel Pacifico Strategy Suite.
Gentlemen, we're going to have to kick off today with the topic no one can avoid, tariffs, which I feel like hopefully our listeners are not tired of hearing about them. But I think Can I enter with maybe a slightly different take on this issue, because we are seeing some progressives really change the way they talk about energy in light of this tariff threat. And I was having a moment, like I was reflecting this morning on how the pandemic for childcare had this real shift in how people saw it. Childcare became economic policy. Is there something similar, courtesy Trump and the tariffs, happening to energy policy, where it goes from either maybe like a climate or an economic policy piece to something very seriously about sovereignty that people really understand and is resonating with voters? Because I'm going to say, for starters, Jonathan Wilkinson, who is really, as one example, really has changed his tune, particularly on pipelines, talking about whether we need to revisit the idea of Energy East to sort of protect our energy security. Mike, I'm worried you're going to feel like a little bit smug or something, or do a little dance here. But does that feel right, that this moment is shifting our view of energy policy?
I don't think Jonathan Wilkinson changed his tune. I think he swallowed his harmonica. He, I mean, it was a rather shocking about face. Not that I have a problem with it, but that those in the energy sector in Alberta, particularly, who hear Jonathan Wilkinson, the federal government, Francois Philippe Champagne now as well, saying we need Energy East, it's just like, they are triggered. So fine, the world has changed and they're changing with it, and we want our politicians to adapt if the circumstances change. So, okay. But I mean, the reality is that oil does not, for those who don't know, oil does not go from Alberta to Eastern Canada through Canada, which is what Energy East would have done. It goes down to the US, then comes back through an Enbridge pipeline back to Ontario. So
I didn't realize either. Trans Mountain is the only pipeline we have that services a market other than the US.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah.
And it partly services the US as well.
Exactly.
But Mike, I don't understand where you're going here. I mean, this has always been a private sector industry, and the private sector organized it in the best possible way and never felt there was a need for energy. So why is this now suddenly a government problem? I mean,
well, the private sector was trying to advance Energy East.
Were they? I don't think so.
BC Energy? I mean,
there's always been a lot of talk about connecting our transmission lines across Canada too. But
they had a significant oil pipeline proposal that got killed about 7 or 8 years ago, right?
Well, a gas one, yeah, but they never doubled down on them the way they did on the Keystone or some of the others.
Well,
Anyway.
I think one reason why there's a concern from the federal government is that we are very vulnerable to the U.S. Cutting off that oil supply.
Yeah, totally. But that was never a concern because we were all fine with the U.S. They were great buddies. This is the unspoken mental breakdown we're having. So it's a bit late for some of this stuff because Energy East, sure, but that's a long, expensive jump over Lake Superior. That's why they didn't bother before. And when I first got going in journalism, I was able to go up to the Mackenzie Valley, where there was a huge plan to build a pipeline all the way down the Mackenzie Valley, tapping Beaufort Sea natural gas. Never got built for a whole set of reasons, but it had to do in part with Indigenous rights and title. But that was 100% to American markets, even though one of the proponents was called the Maple Leaf Line. And we've got a huge backlog of sovereignty projects we could do, which now everybody's talking about. I put icebreakers in the same category. Like what Arctic country would still be, scrambling to get 2 contemporary icebreakers in the water? That's us. And Pierre Poilievre has now promised to make it 4, I think, right? There's a lot of that happening now. Very interesting.
But back to energy. I mean, okay, so not only have they pivoted on, some progressives have pivoted on Energy East in BC. We've seen, we'll get to in a few minutes here, but there's been pivots on oil and gas as well. And it just seems like nationwide, everything we're talking about 6 months ago about we're mad about affordability, we're mad about crime, we're mad about this and that, it's now like right to the top, it's sovereignty.
Yeah.
Right to the top, it's like, what are we gonna do about this guy? south of the border.
No, I agree with that.
100%. And what's interesting about this moment in particular is I feel like when this issue first emerged, when Trump kind of, suggested he'd take over, make us the 51st state, and in calling Justin Trudeau Governor Trudeau, like it felt like funny. And it reminds me of a bit of the moment at the end of the film, The Graduate, where Dustin Hoffman runs off with his bride and they're laughing and they think it's all hilarious. And then they're on the bus and then they're like, oh shit. Like, I feel like as a country, we've kind of had this moment where it was sort of, we're used to this back and forth and this joking about us as the 51st state. And something has landed, I feel like, with Canadians, where now we're like, he's serious and this sucks. And actually, just to build on that, right? Justin Trudeau was really driving that home. I think it was a discussion at a discussion with business leaders in Toronto, saying that like, no, this is real. And it's about critical minerals.
It's about all of the above. It's about all of the above. And I think that the problem for a lot of policymakers, if you go back a month, I think it's barely a month, where we're going to get a couple of Blackhawks, we're going to have a czar who's going to look after all this fentanyl stuff. They scrambled up $1 billion. Trump said, okay, well, let's take 30 days and I'll come back and resume kicking you then. I mean, that was basically what happened. So we're still stuck, though, with the commitments to the Americans on the border. And I think there's going to be more of some of those difficulties. It'll be very interesting to see how it unfolds. Like, we don't have steel exports, which was the latest, but we do have aluminum. Mm-hmm. And Ravi Kahlon's been saying that Rio Tinto assures him that they have a plan. Mm-hmm. They're not saying very much. But that's a very big.
I was reading today. Yeah, I was reading today, right? Because I'd forgotten about this. It was 10% tariffs in 2018. Is that right, on aluminum?
Yeah.
On aluminum, and like sort of those lasted a year, and the consensus is it was, I wouldn't say nothing burger, but people were okay. So, makes me wonder at 25 how different this is going to feel.
Trump. Trump continues his escalation, actually, of annexing Canada because he thinks he can.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's right.
And what are the proof points to say that he can't? Certainly not military. So how does Canada stand up for itself and provide, push back on it, right?
Yeah.
And it's not in our nature to have to go fight. And now we're getting a taste of how other countries feel when they're really pushed around. And it's unnerving.
Yeah. Well, I mean, also, we drastically changed their electoral map. I don't know if I'm a Republican strategist back there, I'd be like, "Ooh, do I want these guys?"
Well, I mean, Trump in the U.S., Trump's favorables are up, right? In the U.S., he goes to the Super Bowl and they cheered him, right?
Yep, and they boo Taylor Swift.
Yeah. So from his perspective, things are going great. They are on offense right now. They are absolutely destroying sacred cows all over the place in the U.S. They are on a roll, right? I don't know how long it's going to last, but they feel like they are super emboldened right now, and we've got to get organized. But in terms of we're just a little political podcast here, much in the geopolitics yet. Hey, there's a good idea for a podcast. But polling.
Yes, let's talk about it, because Mike, there's a noticeable something happening, a shift, right, in the poll numbers.
A couple of respected pollsters, Greg Lyle, former colleague of mine, mentor of mine. He's and also someone who's been active in conservative politics. He's wrote recently that over half of Canadians are approving of how the Trudeau government's handling the tariff dispute, and a smaller number are approving Poilievre's response. Now, in fairness to Poilievre, a lot of people just don't have an opinion on it because they're not seeing much.
Mm-hmm.
Fact is, this is the first time in a long time that the Liberals are getting credit for doing something. And as Greg wrote, the Trudeau people are probably a bit chagrined by this. Like, just as they're on their cleaning out their offices, they're actually on a bit of a hitting their stride here. Now, the other thing,
is it not arguable, though, that some of their stride comes from the fact that they have vowed that Justin Trudeau has?
Well, it's the tariff dispute, right? He has
Is it purely on the tariff dispute, though, is my point? Is the electorate maybe a bit more warm, potentially, to giving them credit because Trudeau has now acknowledged that it's time to go? Is that potentially a complicator
I
in the
think they're
data?
warmer because he is going.
Yes. Yeah. Like that's what, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I think Poilievre's got a bit of incumbent problem. We've been all so sure that he was going to win for so long, and he had 2 or 3 strings to his guitar, axe the tax, stop the crime. None of those are particularly salient right now. And he's struggling, in my mind, to find a way to be very strong Canadian, pro-Canadian, which was the brand he was seizing before, while saying we've got to rebuild this relationship with our great friends and so on. A lot of his base are at least somewhat sympathetic to Trump, if not ready to join the United States. And I think he's lost momentum, and the polling reflects that. I don't know that it means that a Mark Carney would win the election. I don't think it's at that point. And I think it's bad for the NDP. I think the NDP is not in the conversation.
Yeah, the polling's showing that Conservatives still have a healthy lead, although it's not as big as it was.
Mm-hmm.
But one more fact about Greg Lyle's poll is that 59% of Canadians are saying they're afraid.
Mm-hmm.
And of those people who are afraid, they are favoring Mark Carney much more than they are favoring
Pierre Poilievre.
No, the people who aren't afraid are the people who are liking what's
yeah.
They are vastly more likely to vote for Poilievre.
How do you run for prime minister right now and say, job day one, I'm going to defund the CBC? There's not that visceral hatred out there for the CBC, and yet there's a lot of obvious reasons to have a CBC.
I think the Conservatives are going to have to re-examine their strategy, right?
Yes.
Changed. One more poll point just to add here from Abacus, David Coletto. He is quoted as saying there's definitely a big shift happening with the Conservative and NDP voter pools going down and the Liberal voter pool going up. So the Liberals seem to have got off their deathbed. They're pushing in both directions, right and left, in terms of growing their voter pool. Now, they've still got a lot of work to do. But as I will often say on this pod, get busy living or get busy dying. And it seems like they're getting busy living finally. And Carney clearly has more strength than Freeland, and by all accounts is going to win the leadership on March the 9th. So it's setting up a very more interesting federal election than people may have thought was possible 3 months ago.
Greetings, Canadian Political Pod listener. I'm your narrator, Gary, an artificial intelligence-generated voice. Exciting and serious sounding is what we typed in the AI voiceover input field. And boom, Gary exists. Hey, do you know what's not artificial? Not even one bit? The highly influential audiences air quotes media podcasts offer to its advertisers. And I say that with all the sincerity a machine learning, data-optimized, predictive network of interconnected neural nodes can muster. Whether your ad message is on Curse of Politics, the hurly-burly, Hotel Pacifico, or the brand new Race to Replace, you will be reaching cabinet ministers, members of parliament, the political class, the C-suite, and corporate Canada, leading journalists, and tens of thousands of engaged Canadians. People saying this is a unique political moment is underselling it. Policy is under scrutiny. A party leader is being voted on. The Ontario election is underway. There will be a new prime minister. And then there's the guy living in the White House who calls us the 51st state. Does anyone remember another time like this? I'm instantly scouring millions of data points to answer my own rhetorical question. No, you do not. This is when you need to get your message to the decision makers. Email us at contact@airquotesmedia.com. You'll be dealing with Jill and Todd, who are real, not artificial at all people, and generally very friendly. Well, Jill is anyway. We're still deciding about Todd.
So speaking of resurrections, I'm like pausing on the word in case it's too much, but we'll say David Eby, is on a roll. Maybe resurrection is too dire to describe where he was at, but he's had a good couple of weeks, and I think we have a couple clippings that are that summarize this nicely. I'll start with Vaughn Palmer writing about the impact of the.
We have a clipping of the week.
We have a clipping of the week. All right. So the first one is from Vaughn Palmer, who wrote about the impact of the Trump tariffs on the Eby government's political agenda. I'll read directly in Vaughn's words. Whatever else one might say about Donald Trump's hit job on Canada, it did inspire Premier David Eby to shake off the hesitation that followed his near loss in the provincial election. Gone was the hesitation. In its place was an activist premier commanding the public platform as a solo act, twice a day if necessary, to keep up the torrent of announcements from south of the border. All in all, the result was a freshened agenda for a premier who badly needed one after squandering much of the political and fiscal momentum he inherited from John Horgan. Not likely will Eby acknowledge that these changes were prompted by Trump, but nor is it likely that he would have moved this far, this quickly, without the impetus provided by the devil-may-care occupant of the White House. So Vaughn saying Donald Trump is the best thing that ever happened to David Eby. Do we agree with that, Geoff?
Well, it's been a very good thing. I think the Premier's had the best couple of weeks he's had for quite a while. Because on an issue that everybody's very, very concerned about, he's had answers that people were finding satisfactory. So a lot of the other noise that's in the political system goes away. And there's really only one thing you can do in a crisis this big when there's constant meetings with other first ministers, and they're all off to Washington today, and then they'll be rushing back and so on. It's easier to handle in one respect because it suppresses coverage of the other problems that are out there, some of which we'll deal with in a minute. But it also, I think, plays to Eby's strengths. And he had this moment, which I think is kind of the first I know of for sure for him, where he went before the Invictus Games competitors in the big stadium. I guess it was here at Rogers Arena, and gave a speech that really did go viral. I saw it in a lot of places, reaching out to the American competitors and then linking back to the Canadian veterans in a way that was very affecting and positive. Off the cuff, straight from the heart piece that we haven't seen from him very often. So I think he's been able to work it in a couple of settings. One is the tariff one. The second was the Invictus Games one. It'll last for a while. We'll see how long it goes. But this has been a helpful time for him. I don't disagree with Falk.
Hey, do we have another clipping of the week?
Oh. You've been looking at
that? He's super helpful. No, he's just setting me up today. I really appreciate it, Mike. Shout out to you. All right. Our next clipping comes from Rob Shaw, writing about Premier Eby's address to the Invictus Games. And he writes about the speech that you just mentioned, Geoff. The speech went viral, quote from Rob. The speech went viral, amassing high views and high praise from those who saw it. At the time, it sparked American athletes to make heart shapes to Canadian athletes who returned the gestures amid a standing ovation. So, Mike, is this sort of we're seeing Eby now sort of shift from a position where, the electorate was pissed, but at these sort of broad issues of affordability, and it was hard to kind of swing and land a punch. Now he's got something he can put his energy at, and he's proven that he can kind of seize a moment and rally people behind a cause when he's got something a bit more targeted. Are you seeing this working and continuing to work for him?
Well, I agree with both clippings. I agree with Vaughn that there was a malaise heading into the election last October, and it was, as Premier Eby said many times, it was a near-death experience. And I don't feel like the government found its feet until January, and they kind of drifted through November, and we didn't really know what we were getting with a renewed agenda. And then along comes this, and to their credit, they have seized it, and they have found ways to connect meaningful economic policy, even if it's on the fly, with responding to this opportunity. And they are showing that they're pivoting. They are making material pivots in their views on particularly natural resource development. And that, frankly, if I, as a regular people, I think would want to see that, right? Like, here you are presented with new information, you deal with it, right? And you don't stick to your old plan that doesn't apply anymore. You come up with a new one. Now, having said all that, I don't know how long that is sustainable. At some point, it's is this going to be like a prolonged 2-year political honeymoon that John Horgan got during COVID and Andrew Wilkinson was like, hey, remember me? Is that what's going to happen to John Rustad? It's probably not that. But, you know, it is a hard lesson right now for the Conservatives to learn that what got all the attention in August and September is not what's going to get them the attention in April.
Mhm.
And it's going to be hard to compete for attention while Trump's driving the agenda. And they're not as well positioned on this as they are on other issues.
Yeah, yeah. Because their voters are some of those not 59% who are.
We talked about this a bit last week, but John Rustad's position on the economy is not hugely different from David Eby's. He wants permitting to be speeded up and a whole bunch of things like that.
Mm.
I mean, you know, as a layperson listening, I can't tell what of Eby's program John Rustad would cancel on the economic front.
Basically saying go faster.
Yeah.
But, you know, just as Eby has responded and pivoted to the circumstances, so will Rustad. You know, have to respond and pivot too. They're going to have to come up with some new tricks because they, as you said earlier, Geoff, like a certain portion of their base likes Trump, you know?
Yeah.
But you definitely want to keep that in a box right now.
Well, and what's the difference though? Because I assume the same is true for Doug Ford. And yet he's been pretty comfortable kind of standing up. I mean, you know, let's say we'll couch it with he's doing the classic affable Doug thing with it.
Doug Ford is no Pierre Poilievre. Like they are a completely different species of politician. Doug Ford is a centrist who lives and breathes in the suburban air.
Right.
And that's why in my opinion, why he's so successful. He's not a true conservatives are skeptical of him because they don't see him as a guy who will do the hard conservative things. But it's worked for him in this formula, and he has done what Eby's done what he's done, or he's done what Eby's done.
Yeah,
yeah. The moment, right?
Yeah.
And Ford's political career actually was resurrected during COVID.
Yep.
Because he basically did the same thing, right?
He got booed off the stage when the Toronto Raptors won the NBA title. Like, and there was a downtown Toronto parade. He got booed off the stage. That was like late 2019, and then COVID changed everything. Everything.
It's a struggle for Rustad because he doesn't have the chops of a Doug Ford or a Pierre Poilievre. Now, so Poilievre can be mean, but he's definitely a politician, and it's a handicap for him. Whereas Ford seems to be what he is, a successful small medium business guy who's wandered into politics and is trying to do the right thing. And you know, some of the stuff that he does, like shaking up this insane beer retailing system in Ontario, which we won't bother discussing, you know, goes better or worse. But at a time like this, he shines because everybody in Ontario knows their lifeblood is manufacturing. And he's out there fighting tooth and nail for manufacturing. And I think that for David Eby, to go back to the clip, this gave him a chance, as Mike says, to get back to the resource sector where things were not looking great in the fall. Canfor had shut down a lot of mills. The impact on the forest sector was very, very rough. And I think there's going to be a challenge ahead for the Eby caucus as they come to, I raise this every time, but I like to raise it because it keeps coming up in the news too. LNG Canada 2 is a huge investment project building on the one that's already there, which is fully permitted. The only possible delay would be political.
Yeah.
But for the NDP caucus, which has still got many people very committed to climate action in it, it will be a difficult one because the second phase won't fit within the Clean BC plans unless there's huge electrification. So this is real life economic development where there's no delay issue at all. It's already approved. It was approved when John Horgan came into government. And the only issue is, will the proponents want to proceed? And I think that's, you know, one where we're going to hear more soon on that front, I suspect, because those proponents will want to make a decision one way or the other.
Well, just on the politics of it with the Conservatives is that I think they're going to have a difficult time in the immediate road ahead. And so they probably just have to just, you know, plow away and realize that, you know, things may come around again politically. But probably their opportunity as time goes on is that, you know, Eby is talking the talk right now. And he's, you know, we've got these projects we're going to fast track and we're going to do this, we're going to do that. The proof will be in the pudding, right? Are the results going to be there 6 months or a year from now in terms of projects materially having moved faster through the process? And, are people feeling greater economic certainty as a result of a lot of these things he's done? And that is, I think it's going to feel different 6 months to a year from now, because by then the environmentalists will have regrouped and made the BC government's life a little more difficult in these circumstances, because they've got an agenda they're still going to fight for.
Mhm.
First Nations, you cannot speed up that much First Nations engagement. Like
Mhm.
it's you can't snap your fingers and make it happen, right?
Mhm.
There's a reason why it takes time. So, I think the Conservatives need to look at it from that perspective, to say, okay, well, we don't have to fight every day and win every day. We just have to lay some track to get these guys later.
But the irony, Mike, and I think we have to point to it, that the best attack dog in the front bench that Kevin Falcon had is the best one that John Rustad has, Eleanor Sturco, who got a big leak on safe supply and diversion, which she's made good use of in terms of making Josie Osborne's life miserable for a number of days. But she did not get any ringing endorsements from John Rustad when she made comments recently on a different issue. And the attacks, the deeply personal and, in fact, incitement attacks, I think, that John Rustad carried out on Bonnie Henry are another troubling sign of how those people in the Conservative strategy suite are still trying to figure out how to calibrate their actions. Because, Perry Kendall spoke out quite rightly that the tone of John Rustad's criticisms of Bonnie Henry, and he's entitled to criticize her, were very, very worrisome, given that she's had to have a personal security detail for more than 4 years because of death threats she started getting at the very beginning of the pandemic. So, I know how I feel about that. I'm not sure how general voters do, but it just shows a lack of, I think, clear strategic thinking on the Conservative side, and we'll see if they're able to sort through it.
Well, we'll come back to this in other regular programming, I'm sure, once we sort of this tariff over story, I think, also invites us to forget that behind all this, there is work ongoing to develop a budget that will be coming out soon. That thing, right? Still the running of government, other sectors, right? So related.
How do they just declare like emergency powers? Do we still have to go through all this legislative?
Those are the days.
The Riot Act, can we just declare that? How do you do that? Stand on the street corner and declare the Riot Act or whatever? Anyways.
Well, can I just venture into sort of a space that I think in the background of all this, some of the other stuff that the Eby government's going to be needing to track is the recent report that came out from Youth and Children Representative Jennifer Charlesworth. It was really on the state of family social services, a big focus on the state of the workforce. I'll read a quick quote from that. Quote, based on these findings, it is clear the workforce is in a state of crisis, and perhaps the only reason the situation is not more severe is the responsibility and moral imperative that workers feel to serve their clients. Relying on this work ethic is not sustainable, as is evidenced by the number of staff who take extended leaves or leave the ministry altogether due to burnout. The culture and resourcing of the ministry must be addressed to sustain, grow, and strengthen the capacity of the MCFD workforce. So listen, I know this is not new. We have sort of pretty dire reports on the state of children and family services going back decades. But it is a reminder that there are other pressing issues and other tough decisions for this government right now, particularly on the eve of a budget that is going to, I wonder how much the attention on the deficit will change, but there will be some attention to it. What do you think, what bandwidth is there, I think, to address some of what was in this report, Geoff? Like, are they going to be able to kind of go back to some of these other issues that, minus the sort of Trump overstory, might be getting more attention right now?
Well, I think it's very difficult. Charlesworth herself said it would take the better part of 10 years to really fix it properly. But nobody's proposing that we do away with the separate ministry or anything like that. There's also a whole lot of important issues related to the provision of child protection by Indigenous First Nations, that kind of thing. But what she points to, I think, is a problem in government generally, which is that some of the jobs are ones that require a lot of training, a lot of judgment, a lot of emotional capacity, like these jobs. The government had to broaden the criteria to try to keep the pool of recruits full. That had its own downsides. This is a really systemic issue, just not only on understanding why kids need care, but also on how to support workers in those jobs, get them the training they need, get them the supervision they need, and so on. It's a really, really difficult problem. And one that, unfortunately, most voters don't care about because they don't encounter it in their own lives very much, if at all. And I think that's a problem with a lot of these public services. When I was reading it, I thought a bit about childcare, which is got the same challenges in some respects in terms of recruiting people, compensating them properly, giving them appropriate oversight, allowing for judgment, and insisting on accountability. But I think in the case of what Ms. Charlesworth is pointing to, this has been deteriorating for a long time, and the government's going to have to find some gifted leadership, I think, in the public service to take it on. The new minister, Jody Wickens, is very capable, but this portfolio is absolutely the most damaging for any minister to go into, no matter how talented and committed they are to it. It just degrades your ability to perform. There's going to be a problem. That's 100% guaranteed, which will be placed before you that you had no idea about and no opportunity to do anything about ahead of time. And so I think it's a challenge to the public service to think a lot of this stuff through. But it's a troubling report.
It's a bit of a ridiculous performance art that goes on in these situations where the minister gets hung out to dry for problems within the ministry when it's not resourced properly.
Yeah.
And sure, a cabinet minister can make a positive difference, but it's like tying both hands behind their back. And we've seen ministers get sacrificed on the, when the headlines stack up and they're bad. And I think the media are a bit culpable about this too. Like it's not the minister being stingy with the resources. They get what they get, out of the budget.
When I can't remember all the personalities, but Nick Simons, who had a lot of background in this area, did a lot of important work in 2017, 2018, creating with enormous effort an appropriate location where the opposition critic could learn more about an issue in the press, because the privacy rules are so baroque that they really wind up leaving all kinds of people exposed to terrible criticism for things they had no reasonable accountability for. And Nick set this up so that there could be certain oaths given and things like that. There's certain things go on in the public service. I'm way off topic now, but the secrecy issues that we see playing out federally too, where Poilievre will not get a private briefing, the NDAs that are in place on so many things, like if you are interested in the settlement that it seems to be coming in opioids, good luck learning more. That's just covered in NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. So it's very, very difficult. And in child protection in particular, the privacy rules and other factors make it almost impossible for a reasonable briefing or strategic discussion to happen in a particular case. They can do it for broad cases.
Well, just to close off on the children's issue, though, I mean, the sad reality is that this is an all too common story that's been going on for over 25 years. Government cannot say they weren't warned based on how that was worded from the representative's report. I mean, she really laid it out there for everybody, so I'm glad we're giving it some airtime here. But most of those kids, or at least the highest number of kids that are in care, are Indigenous, vastly disproportionate to the population. So I know there's been a lot of work done to bring in the Indigenous side into the ministry, and boy, there's a lot at stake here, and I don't know what the answer is, but boy, it's not working.
No.
Well, I like what you mentioned though, Mike, because I do think I'm going to pick on the media a bit here and say, like, if you want to draw attention to this, call this untenable. A couple of weeks from now, then when we're looking at the budget and your lead is just the size of the deficit, you're underserving the discussion. And I think there's room to not that the deficit isn't important, and I don't think that it's not part of the discussion, but I think there's room to think more holistically about these conversations and sort of what is and isn't at the disposal and the powers of a minister taking over a ministry like this right now. All right. We got one more thing. Sorry. Right? Mike, your lonely campaign to fill the seats in the Senate has partially
You're
succeeded.
passed over again, Mike. Is that what's happened?
I refuse to accept the offer that never arrived. Yes, a senator, ladies and gentlemen, a senator has been
Yeah.
appointed after over 2 years of it being vacant, because no one noticed that it was vacant. Yes,
Oh,
Larry Campbell
Sam.
left the Senate and didn't tell anyone, and they didn't bother. Baltaj Dillon,
Yep.
who is well known as the first RCMP officer to wear a turban, and under difficult circumstances in that day and age,
Hmm.
he took a lot of pressure in the communities and otherwise, but over time has been seen as a leader and a pioneer in his community, among other good works he did in policing career. He did run for the NDP in the last election, incidentally,
Hmm.
in Surrey, Serpent.
Yeah, I think so. That's right.
Tyne? Did we land on Tyne?
I don't know.
I don't
Bridges
know. I can't
is wrong.
remember. It was
But
much debate.
But Baltaj Dillon, I mean, I don't know. I don't think anyone's going to quibble with the appointment except the Conservatives, who will see yet another independent senator who is not a Conservative. And the Senate is completely stacked against, if Poilievre becomes prime minister, it's completely stacked against him. So, anyways, that's politics. But anyways, we have a new senator, and congratulations, Senator Dillon. And there's one more vacancy left. Kate,
Well, okay.
Mm.
time for a woman in there.
Are they gonna have time to fit? Like they're done, right? There's no way they can fit in another one, I'm assuming.
Come on.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll keep watching.
Justin's father certainly didn't wait or didn't take his foot off the gas on his way out the door. He's
All right.
pointing everybody into the blue sky on it. So there you go. There might be more.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Now we grab a drink.
Let's raise a glass or take a shot. Time to raid the minibar.
Okay, I was going to go first with a glass to Brenda Bailey, who we haven't heard too much about, but she's the finance minister and she's got the budget. And if it wasn't bad enough that there was a large deficit already that she was being directed to manage down by the premier, there's now the tariff battle and all of the massive complications that it poses and the impending bargaining with the public sector unions. So a very tough year to do the budget. I'll just raise a glass to her and leave it at that because she's got a lot of work ahead of her. But it will be the big story. Interesting to see, Kate, as you asked, whether or not people are as worried about the deficit as some of the business folks are.
Mm-hmm.
Not
All right.
just business folks, Jeff.
Not just business folks.
Business folks.
No, some others,
Business
yeah.
folks and Mike.
And social democrats maybe. Tommy Douglas was concerned about the deficit.
I know. I'm concerned about it too, but
Yeah.
there's degrees of concern.
Well, yeah. There's some other.
Generation. That's all we're thinking about here.
And there's
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Anyways.
Yeah.
I will once again greedily do two. First of all, I'd like to raise a glass to David McLean, who passed away recently. David was a political giant in Canada. Frankly, he was one of those guys who raised a lot of money for Liberal prime ministers, particularly Jean Chrétien, over the years. He was a big force behind the scenes in the Liberal Party of Canada, but he was also a big force in the Vancouver business community as a Board of Trade chair and many other hats he wore. And he was a longtime chair of CN Rail, too, when they took it private. So he made a pretty big impact. His son, Jason's also been chairman of the Board of Trade, and the McLean family is pretty active in the community. They have the Vancouver Film Studios. So I just wanted to honor David. But also someone who's very much alive, I wanted to raise a glass to. Crystal Smith, Chief Crystal Smith, our former guest on Hotel Pacifico, Chief Counsellor of the Haisla Nation, was honored last week by the Energy Council of Canada as the Person of the Year, recognizing her accomplishments in the energy sector. And noteworthy that Cedar LNG, even though it basically has I think is approved and under construction, was still on the Eby's list of projects, which is always a good signal that, the sun is shining on you from government. And that's, I think, a sign of the respect that the work she and the Heisel have done in advancing that project in Kitimat. So raise a glass to Crystal.
Fantastic.
Here.
All right. I am going to take a shot, and I'm going to take a shot that with terrible timing, because I'm going to bring us back to a topic, housing, that we haven't talked about in a while. And I've thought about coming to it a few times because it relates to my own experience and the work we've been doing as a family to try and get a building permit to renovate our home in Vancouver. So I'm taking a shot.
Crazy idea.
You know, I appreciate
guy used to be
that.
on council, might be able to help you.
Yeah, I know. Well, I should have listened to him like 3 years ago when we embarked on this process. And I have to say, I am not the first person to complain about sort of, some of the intents of some of the good policies that come together in our building code in Vancouver. I'm pro accessibility. I'm pro sustainability, you name it. But this process has been hurtful. And it has been abusive of my personal finances in that we have spent a lot of money correcting direction given to us by city staff, and then correcting it again when they change their minds or someone interprets it differently. And then abusive in the sense of all the taxpayer resources over 3 years that have gone into just an effort to renovate our home so that we can put a basement suite in there for my father, who lives on his own and wants to come live with us and probably needs to do that sooner rather than later. And when we embarked on this, if I had known it would take 3 years to even get a permit, we still don't have one, I probably would have sat down with the family to have a discussion about something more realistic. It just never occurred to me that it could take this long and this many resources. And I can tell you stories about sort of the bizarre change in direction, weird minutia that have been sweated by staff who I know are good people who are mean well and are trying to just do their job. But I think they have an impossible task right now in that all the things that come together, the patchworks of policies, just don't compute. And what happened just before the holidays was just before Christmas, after almost 3 years of going through this process, the City of Vancouver Buildings and Licensing Department told us that they were no longer convinced that what we were doing was a renovation under their code and that it might be a new build and that we had to go to BC Housing to get their opinion on which it was, which we did. And BC Housing got back to us, and BC Housing said, it is a renovation, go forth. And then the City of Vancouver said, we're still not sure, let us think about it, went away for a month, thought about it, and just got back to us this week to tell us that they think it is actually a new build. And all the work we have done over at great expense to us and to the taxpayer over 3 years is out the window, and a totally different code applies, and no one thought to mention it until now. And look, all of this is awful. It's a joke how this is all played out. But I want to say one other thing, which is, in all of this, the hardest part is my father, who's 77 and would like to retire and come live with his grandkids and stay with us. And every time we speak, he asks me about the permit and the status of it. And every time I have to give him an answer that sounds like it comes out of a Kurt Vonnegut novel. That is just so, I know my dad knows I wouldn't lie to him about this, but what comes out of my mouth is unbelievable. And it is so hurtful. And I am one person, and this shit has to stop. There has to be a better way to build density in the neighborhoods where we know density and create multi-generational homes that we know are better for our healthcare system and align to all the policy objectives we all care about. And stop fighting over little details that achieve neither of those ends and end up wasting everybody's time, efforts, and hurting people, real families. So sorry, I'm pretty angry this week. My timing is off, but it is a clear shot at the City of Vancouver. They need to do better.
That is the shot of all shots.
Yeah, I have nothing to add.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Kate. I mean, just leaving politics out of it, it's just people dealing with government. It's why people get mad at government, right? Like it's just institutional government. It's because it's you're a successful person who has the means to fight it, and even still you're, being frustrated by it, and just think of all the people that don't have the means to fight it too.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. This is kind of it. I've been reluctant to share it on that. Like I have a lot of privilege and power in this dynamic. And the more time I've spent with it and the more ridiculous it's got, I'm convinced there are stories that are probably, I'm sure there's more stories like mine and people who have a lot less agency in it. And I think in this broader context of all this stuff that's going on, how anyone's spending time on the shit that they're spending time on, I can't, it doesn't register. We need to step back and shake our heads a bit. So hopefully we'll come back to that conversation and talk about it some more, but thanks for hearing me out.
Wow.
Jeff
All
and I
right.
got to
Terrible.
up our rant game for sure. Just knocked a couple off in the last few weeks here.
Oh, I know you both can deliver a good one, so we'll see.
Get out of our easy chairs here.
Yeah, and we've got lots of material. It's busy times. I know we're gonna have some more good discussions going forward. So I want to thank you both for hearing me out. I want to thank our guest, Karin Kirkpatrick, and our presenting sponsor, Telus and Fortis BC. We will see you next week, guests. BC, you can never lead.
Check out time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.